There are only a handful of celebrities in the world of craft making, and Kaffe Fassett is one of them. His revolutionary influences on knitting are remarkable, and he's just as inventive today as he was several decades ago when he first inspired many to paint with yarn. His creative and colorful patterns mimic designs he sees in his travels and everyday surroundings. His natural instincts for design and color have won him fans around the world, and his books are as beautiful to look at as they are useful and inspiring. I was delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Kaffe about the craft he still loves the most. It all began on a trip through Scotland on a train.
I went with Bill Gibb up to Scotland and found an amazing mill. He was a wonderful fashion designer in London, and he was looking for ancient tartans to do a collection. And so we went across the wilds of Scotland, which was just incredibly beautiful and subtle in coloring. And in a mill at the end of this landscape was a collection of yarns that were exactly like the landscape, the most subtle and beautiful, and the sages, the brackens, the lichens, everything was there. And I bought 20 colors of yarn, thinking I have got to knit a sweater that has all of this landscape in it, and got on the train back to London and said to a woman sitting across from me, I've got to knit a sweater, because nobody could follow the directions that I would give them for a sweater, and I've got a sweater I've got to make. So she said, oh, it's easy, I'll show you. Have you got needles? And I said, yes, I bought some needles for this yarn. And she showed me how to cast on, how to knit a few rows, and off we went. And when I got to London, I went to a store and bought a little 9-penny knitting pattern that had raglan sleeves, and I put all 20 colors in my first sweater and took it straight to Vogue. Because, I thought, this is fabulous. This is the most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life. I hope that other people see it. And when I got to Vogue, they saw it. So that was a very exciting moment.
You really did take it straight to Vogue?
Straight to Vogue. I did happen to know somebody who worked at Vogue, and I said to them, who do I go to about knitting? And they said, oh, there's this extraordinary woman called Judy Britton, who's Irish. And she was as extraordinary as you can possibly imagine. She saw instantly that this was a movement that was going to happen in knitting. She said, this is where knitting is going in the future. And so they asked me to design a Fair Isle waistcoat for the Vogue knitting book. And I said, what's Fair Isle? I had no idea. So that was extraordinary. Then I asked, this woman was cleaning up for us, and I said, how do you do Fair Isle? And she said, oh, it's like this duck. And she just showed me quickly how to do it and how to knit my ends in. And so off I went. And from that moment, I just seemed to have wonderful luck. The Missonis, who probably had the best knitting company in the world in Italy, came over and asked me to knit for them when they saw my first thing appear in Vogue. And so I knitted a collection for them, and just went on. And that was working with machine knitting, which was very limited. But I was interested always in hand knitting, so that one could use multiple amounts of color, and it could be just as rich and idiosyncratic as possible.
Have you ever knit anything that was just one color?
I tried to knit something in one color once, and it was so arduously boring that I couldn't make. The thing is, you never know where you've been. You knit and knit and knit and knit, and then you think, have I made progress or not? Whereas when you're working on a progression of patterns and colors, you have this wonderful sense of achievement. And also you're building the building blocks of an architectural arrangement. So I love that. And I cannot understand people that can sit and knit something in beige or gray or, whatever color, and go on and on and on. It has never interested me. I mean, I'm a painter, and I came at this from the standpoint of making a tapestry. I always say, if I'm going to knit, if I'm going to bake, I don't want to bake white bread. I'm going to make something that you don't find in the bakeries.
Good. I agree with you too. Do you think people are born with an innate sense of color, or do you think it's something that you can learn about?
I think some people are born with the sense that color is important, and therefore they look for it everywhere. Other people just don't think it's important. They think words are important, or dollar signs, or celebrities, or something. They're on the lookout for something else. But what I feel is that if you are awakened to the importance of color and the magic properties of color, how it can absolutely transform your mood and your health and everything, then I think you start to look at the world in a different way. I've had people come to my classes and drive off a road the next morning coming back to the second day of the workshop because they were looking at the color for the first time on a road they've traveled all their lives. So it's true that we can awaken one's sensitivity to color, I think. Knitting has to be one of the most mysterious things. I've learned to make patchwork quilts, I've learned to crochet, I've learned to embroider. I'm working on a big needlepoint piece at the moment. I've done all these things, rag rugs, hooking, everything else. Everything seems to have a certain kind of thing, how you do it and the mechanics of it. And it seems quite straightforward. You pull a piece of wool through canvas. But knitting, there is just something about it. You're rubbing these two sticks together, I always say, and you're just feeding this yarn through, and it's a nice feeling. The fibre is nice, and I'm working with bamboo needles, that's nice. The whole process is elegant and lovely and soothing. It seems to me, after I've knitted for just a few minutes, I'm calmer and I'm happy, and also I'm progressing a progression of colors, and so I've got color, tactile feelings, progression of a work. The whole thing is just a lovely experience, and I never get tired of it. I've knitted for 40 years without stop, and I can't wait to get up the next morning when I'm in the middle of a knitting project. It is something absolutely thrilling to do. So it is very satisfying to the soul, I think. It's very interesting about knitting becoming popular at this stage. When I first started to knit, way back in 1968, 69, I was sitting there doing this amazing activity and thinking, this could change the world. This is the most wonderful thing. Why doesn't everybody catch on to this? I sit here with just humble yarns, and I could be just unraveling sweaters. It could be really cheap, but I could be creating a wonderful work of art. And I can do it anywhere. I can do it in the tube. I can do it on a plane. I can do it in a park. I can do it anywhere. It's just wonderful. And so I felt that everybody was going to catch on, and this was going to sweep the world and be a force for peace, But it didn't. And in fact, knitting took a huge nosedive, and I had to live through that and, go through all the peculiar things of going to a dinner party and saying, what do you do for a living, and having to explain. I once went to an embassy party where all of the American achievers in London had turned up, and the Queen came to speak to us all. And they said, this man, Mom, has had an exhibition at the V&A, at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And she said, oh yes, what of? And they said, oh, knitting and needlepoint. And they just got to knitting, and she said, knitting? I can do that. And she just turned on her heel and walked away. So it went through a very bad period where it was very looked down upon, even by the Queen of England. And then, a wonderful PR in New York got hold of the whole story of knitting and found out about, she and somebody in Los Angeles together started these wonderful knit outs, and they were festivals of knitting, and where people would just be knitting in the streets, and fashion shows and music and excitement, and getting the young people interested. And then there was lots of fancy wool came along, so people could just knit a hairy berry scarf, in about a weekend. And so that was like exciting. It became sexy and wonderful, as it always should have been. To me, it was just high time that this phenomena took place. So it's wonderful that it has swept the world, and that there are all these shops opening, and that everybody wants to be in this business. How wonderful to get, I mean, instead of having people, snorting coke and, having sex in the bushes and things or whatever, people are turning people on to, that they're teaching them to go home and be happy in their own company and to do something wonderful. I remember hearing one day in a shop, a girl say, I can't come out with you tonight. I'm going home. I'm working on a sweater. And I thought, right on, girl. I just was so happy that she was happy to go home rather than go out with her friends.
Yeah, good point. I like that. And along with that goes more and more people that are knitting for charities.
Yes. I mean, and knitting for loved ones. What more wonderful thing you can do than sit down and knit a wonderful sweater and think about somebody you adore that's going to get that sweater, your favorite aunt or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your whatever, that into it can pour all the affection and time. You're giving them time. What a wonderful present.
You are basically paid to be creative. Does that just make you kind of one of the luckiest guys on earth, or do you feel pressure to constantly be inventing new things?
Both. You feel pressured because everyone's applauding so loud, and you're thinking, how am I going to top this? What am I going to do for my next trick? But on the other hand, I am the luckiest person alive. I just feel so blessed that I want to get up every morning and do what I do, I get to the point where I don't care whether I please people or not, because one of the things I've understood about creativity is that you always get to a point where you don't please some people. They start to want to freeze you in time and not have you change. And as a creative person, you're always trying to think of new ways to keep yourself awake and alive, and so you start changing. But I do many things. I design fabrics, and so I'm able to put my painting into my fabric designs and patchwork and needlepoint and all those things. And so a change is as good as a rest. I'll just go off and do something else for a while.
Yeah.
And then I come back to my lovely favorite craft of knitting.
Excellent. How has your skill as a painter influenced your work? I don't know. That might be too hard a question.
No. It's a very good question. The question of how art influences a craft. It's the other way around. Because of concentrating on color, and because knitting is fairly limited, you can't do really realistic things with knitting without going totally mad and ending up with sweaters 100 feet thick. So you can't do a tapestry, but you can do manipulation of color in the most wonderful way. So you really get into looking at color and what makes color absolutely sing. Like this is a sweater that I've done for Peruvian Connection. And that's a Pima cotton sweater. And you can just see how I'm just playing with gradations of colors and things. This then feeds back into my painting in a fantastic way, or into the painting of my textiles. When I'm doing flower prints and things like that, I'll be learning that magenta touches rust and makes it sing, or, blues come into greens and do a certain thing. And I've learned about value. I've learned about so many things from knitting colors. It's just a wonderful way of approaching color. In fact, I was saying if I was going to open an art school and teach artists, I would make them do textiles to really come to terms with color in a way that gets into your blood.
Do you think you've influenced and inspired other men to knit? I know you've definitely inspired lots of people.
Yes, when I do my tours, which I'm doing right now, I do come across people all the time who say, I got into patchwork because I started knitting your designs. And so I know that there's been an influence in that way. Whether I've inspired men, yes, I think so. I mean, very often I'll be showing my work or giving a lecture, or I did a television series that went out in England. Every single time an episode would end, I would get a phone call from a guy saying, gosh, that looked so exciting. Do you think I could learn? Could I do it? So yes, I think there must have been some men that got turned on to knitting because of watching me, and then I sort of broke the stigmatism of it, perhaps. I'll tell you a little story. that as I was driving through Seattle, and here we are in Seattle making this interview, I said to a friend of mine, I was in the back of a taxi, and this big bruiser was driving the taxi with a half-grown beard, looked like a biker. And I said to my friend, Charles, the world's divided between those people who crochet and those people who knit. And the taxi driver said, right on, mate! And I wasn't sure which he did. I didn't dare to ask him. But obviously there's a few of us out there, Well, I learned on the train, so I was out of the closet from day one. I had nowhere to hide.
Yeah. Well, that takes courage. I mean,
well, but also it takes just the logic of, are you going to waste hours of public time waiting for trains, waiting for long haul flights to New Zealand to give a lecture? I'm certainly going to knit the whole way, because if I watch films and listen to music and read, it isn't the same as knitting. If I knit, I feel quite calm and rested at the end of the flight. I don't feel shattered. So it's good for that.
It is good for that. And it's good because you can also talk to someone at the same time. It's
Exactly.
Not like reading a book.
It's very social. It's lovely and social. And getting together with groups of friends and all sit around and knit or do beading or needlepoint or something with your hands and listen to music and have conversation. There is nothing more lovely than that. I listen to Radio 4 in England, which is a wonderful radio station that has poetry and in-depth interviews and wonderful dramas and stories. And I learn about the whole world through that radio. And in fact, I dedicated my first book, Glorious Knitting, to Radio 4.
What about, say, 30 years ago? Were you very much an oddity, or did you run across men that knit as you traveled?
Yeah, I was an oddity, and I met a few men who were also oddities. If you came to a yarn shop and you said, I'm looking for yarns, they would say, oh, is that for your mother, dear? Because those yarns don't go together. And I'd have to explain I knew what I was doing. But no, what I feel is that there are men always that have taken up these crafts and done them. Just like dressmaking and cooking and everything else, It's just that knitting has been quite lowly, and guys are a little more ambitious. You can't put on a chef's hat and do knitting in a big hotel and become important. Where people will drive for miles to taste your soup or something. So it's a different kind of celebrity. I mean, I can't complain. I've certainly had the celebrity, but what's nice about it is that one isn't that kind of rock celebrity. You're connecting with people who use their hands and are quite gentle. You don't get too many stalkers in this business. You get a few, but you don't get too many. I always think what's interesting about my knitting is the influences, and going back into the Persian carpets and the pottery and everything from the past, mosaics and tile forms and so forth, so that I'm looking for, it becomes a rich history of the decorative use of geometry and color, and that it gets recorded in the knitting, because it shows all those influences. And to me, that's one of the very, very exciting aspects of it. Anybody interested in the history of decorative arts should be absolutely fascinated by the knitting that's being produced these days, because it's a very wonderful, I mean, just like patchwork quilting, it is bringing something alive that didn't have a way of living so easily before.
And then the fact that you can wear it.
Yes, and then it's this wonderful practical thing you can wrap around yourself and sleep on and, throw over a chair or over the balcony. I mean, just this piece of Brandon sitting here, over this chair, this wonderful stone wall that he's knitted, how wonderful.
Yeah, well, you certainly are incredibly inspiring, so thank you.
Thank you.